MMORPGs. Historically, this is the genre that truly kicked off the free-to-play monetization strategy. Even if you think that has been a net negative of catastrophic proportions to most of the gaming industry by creating a profit incentive for developers to focus on other forms of monetization which might be hell-bent on nickel and diming you for every slight inconvenience and gameplay loop that would otherwise just have been solved or included in a typical buy-to-play title. Even if you think that, there are some positives to this. Like the fact that most of the top 10 MMORPGs that exist are actually free-to-play right now. I did a similar list for 2024, however this year I'm gonna order these from my personal least favorite to my #1 most favorite free-to-play MMO of 2025. I'm literally, objectively, always 100% correct. So you don't have to worry about any potential opinions or biases here, as I am literally the arbiter of every and all truth in regards to MMOs. Now, due to new games releasing and updates, this list has shifted and changed over the past year, and I'll go over the recent changes if there are any. So without further ado, let's kick things off. And in 10th place, we have none other than The Lord of the Rings Online, or as I like to call it, the waiting room for Amazon Games' upcoming Lord of the Rings MMO. Released on April 24th of 2007 by Turbine Inc., which later turned into Standing Stone Games, LOTRO is definitely dated. However, don't let this deter you. This game has been receiving updates the entire time, and there is a ridiculous amount of content for you to delve into. LOTRO features an immersive open-world Middle-earth with a ton of familiar locations, such as the Shire or Moria, and you can select from a ton of different classes and races which you can combo together in order to lead to different playstyles. Some of my complaints definitely include the dated user interface. You might think that's not really an issue, but trust me, it's definitely a pain point. And some people find the leveling to be rather slow-paced. This could either be a positive or a negative, depending on how you enjoy games. I personally played LOTRO for the first time in 2023, and I really enjoyed myself. As a longtime fan of the IP, it was awesome to jump into Tolkien's work through an MMO medium. However, I had one main issue which ultimately led to me quitting: server issues. I experienced lag and rubber banding, but earlier this year they actually released new 64-bit servers to help combat exactly this issue. And apparently the lag has mostly been fixed. Other than that, the monetization is pretty standard. I wouldn't call this pay to win for the casual player or for someone who's focused on the story, but they are going to be selling you a subscription and microtransactions. The subscription includes faster XP rates, access to a ton of content, and some quality of life, including increased inventory space, which is particularly important as you'll often find your inventory is overflowing with new items. With all that being said, I think LOTRO is still to this day an awesome experience, especially for fans of The Lord of the Rings, and considering the amount of content and updates this game has and still continues to have, it's totally worth checking out even 18 years after its initial release, and that's why it deserves the number 10 spot on this list. Following that, at number 9, we have the Defiance Relaunch, a sci-fi third-person shooter MMO that was developed by Trion Worlds and launched in April of 2013. This was a crossover project tied to a sci-fi TV series of the same name, and Defiance is set in a post-apocalyptic Earth following an alien invasion. Now, Defiance actually shut down in 2021. Despite a pretty loyal and dedicated fanbase, the developers didn't consider the project worth continuing. And I never even got the chance to try it. That is, until it was recently re-released by Fox Games just a couple of months ago. And to be honest, I was actually blown away. It's like if Borderlands was multiplayer but set in the Fallout universe. Defiance is what a proper shooter-based MMORPG should look like, with a huge world that allows for massive real-time player interaction. Defiance will have you exploring a pretty sizable map with upwards of 1,000 other players on any given server. You progress by following the main questline, leveling up, and customizing your abilities and kit, as well as participating in open-world events with a ton of other players. There's open-world raids, there's instance PvP, or you can just drive around exploring the map. Where the game falls a little short is in terms of its server stability. Definitely some reports of server issues at the moment, but hopefully this is temporary, as well as a lack of updates. Fox Games claims that they'll be continuing to update the game frequently, and it's still a little too soon to tell just what they mean by frequently, but at the moment the game feels a little lackluster when compared to other MMOs in terms of just the amount of content. However, with all that being said, I personally had an awesome experience playing, randomly running into 40+ players who are doing an open world raid. It really felt like the actual open world looter shooter MMO that otherwise doesn't really exist in the genre. Definitely worth checking out. So moving on to number 8, and this one could be considered somewhat controversial. However, in my opinion, it totally deserves its spot on this list. Throne and Liberty, released just last October and already having received some major updates. This is a cross-platform tab target MMO where you play as a shapeshifter, and the weapons you're currently using will dictate what class you actually are. The world is absolutely stunning. The graphics, the music, the setting, the colors all create a genuinely immersive experience that can't be downplayed. It's probably my favorite part of the game. The leveling experience is engaging and the questing is fun, the dungeons are fantastic and challenging, and the amount of player interaction in terms of open world bosses and group dungeons is top of the lines in terms of the genre. At some points there were upwards of 50 players or more all fighting the same boss, and even on epic quality graphics, I experienced literally zero lag. In March of this year, we saw the Wilds of Talandre content update, which really is Throne and Liberty's first major update, adding a new zone, a ton of group content, and a ton of quality of life. But there are some issues that start to arrive once you realize the gameplay loop is pretty time-gated. You can only participate in a certain amount of dungeons per day, you can only spend a certain amount of time in open world dungeons per day, and you can only complete a specific amount of contracts per day. And while most people won't actually reach these daily limits, you can also save them up over time, but it can lead to a sour taste in your mouth, especially if you're the type of player to actually complete all of these activities every day. On top of that, the world is controlled by the top guilds, who will hoard access to certain areas by constant collaborating and politicking with the other top guilds. For some people that's a positive, and for others not so much. Either way, Throne and Liberty had a pretty successful launch, all things considered. Though we don't know the actual numbers, the player base has settled into a much smaller but still very dedicated and active amount. Despite following a lot of typical Korean MMO tropes, especially in regards to its monetization, I genuinely had a great time playing through the game myself, and I'm looking forward to returning and checking it out soon. I know for some people Throne and Liberty is probably a hard pass, but in the current MMO climate, I think it was actually a pretty well-received game considering its developers and the expectations that a lot of people had going in. Next up, number 7. A game I probably would have never featured on one of these lists previously is none other than DDO, Dungeons & Dragons Online. Though it's never made it into an actual video on my channel, I tried DDO for the first time last year, and I had a fantastic experience. It's very similar in terms of aesthetic and even monetization to Lord of the Rings Online, which makes sense considering both games were developed and published by Standing Stone Games. DDO remains faithful to D&D in many ways, even just in character customization, which is ridiculously in-depth. There are so many different classes and customization options, including skills, feats, and ability scores, and there's multi-classing, which allows for really diverse builds, and all of this basically means you have near infinite options. The world is split up into instances, which you can enter solo or as a group, and on varying difficulty levels, which will dictate your reward. But where I found DDO really shined was its combat system, which is somewhat reminiscent of GuildWars 1. It's definitely a little dated, but it implements much more strategy than your typical MMO combat. For example, the timing of your critical hits or heals or traps are basically the most important aspect of winning any confrontation. I found the game to be quite challenging, honestly, and it's in that challenge that I found the reward, and it was a really satisfying experience. Players will undertake quests ranging from solo missions to group-based raids with up to 12 players, and quests generally involve battling iconic D&D monsters or solving puzzles or navigating traps. If you're a fan of D&D, this MMO is a must-try, and even if you know nothing about D&D, the game genuinely holds up, especially as a free-to-play option. And that's why it's at number 7. So at this point, we're starting to get into what I would basically consider to be the best of the best in terms of free-to-play MMOs. From this point onwards are games that I either actively play or check in on pretty much a monthly basis. These games are all in my rotation and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. So starting off that rotation, we have probably my favorite, at least modern MMO to really ever come out of Korea, Lost Ark. Released in the West in 2022 by Smilegate and Amazon, this is an ARPG mixed with an MMO, allowing you to explore an entire world by sailing across the ocean and gathering collectibles or participating in really difficult boss fights. Honestly, Lost Ark was a complete blast on its release. The problems really started to appear after people had been playing for a while and they started reaching bottlenecks, where essentially in order to progress and stay at the top level of endgame content, you either had to cough up money or treat the game like a full-time job, even sometimes more than a full-time job. That was basically everyone's first impression anyway, and I mean, this game had a ridiculously successful Western launch, peaking at over 1 million concurrent players on Steam. And while a lot of people were quite happy with its extremely challenging content, fluid gameplay, and immense amount of horizontal progression that was available, unfortunately, a lot of people hit that wall, where the game started to feel a little pay to win, and definitely not very solo-friendly. However, as of recently, Lost Ark has actually done quite a good job to combat this by implementing a ton of catch-up mechanics, allowing new players to catch up to the most most recent tier of content much faster than was ever possible before. The developers have also indicated a new focus on solo content, allowing players to participate in raids and dungeons that were previously group only. Another issue that has to be talked about when it comes to Lost Ark, despite their ongoing efforts to combat it, is the botting issue. Though not as problematic as it was previously, it's definitely still relevant and has a negative impact on the game's economy. With that being said, if you want an ARPG experience inside of an MMO, I don't think there are many other games that top the combat, fluidity, world, and systems of Lost Ark. And the recent updates mean that new players can hop back in and catch up much faster than before. So moving on to number 5, one of my personal favorite MMOs of all time, Star Wars: The Old Republic. Released in 2011, so it's a bit of an older title, it definitely doesn't show its age quite as much as other MMOs that were released in that era. Star Wars is a tab target story-driven MMO that runs on a subscription-based monetization model that gives you access to the entirety of the game. However, you don't need to maintain your subscription to maintain access to future expansions and areas. Star Wars features 8 free-to-play storylines that are really well voice-acted, and each of your decisions you make in-game will shape how your character is perceived and interacted with. It's a total narrative masterclass. Other than maybe Final Fantasy XIV, I don't see any other MMOs focusing this much on story and doing it so well. This alone makes up hundreds and hundreds of hours of gameplay that you can access completely for free. However, I think it's okay to categorize Star Wars as an RPG MMO. While playing the game, you might realize that it doesn't really offer too much incentive to play with others, outside of a few niche scenarios. And most of the time, you're just going to be experiencing the world and the story completely solo. With that being said, Star Wars was one of my favorite experiences while playing an MMO, and as someone who's not really a massive fan of the franchise, I was surprised to realize that actually had no bearing on how much fun and enjoyment I got out of the game. You're quite quickly roped into your character's world, and the impact of your choices in dialogue or actions you take during quests gets you immediately invested into your character. I genuinely wish I could rank Star Wars even higher on this list, but there are some absolute free-to-play juggernauts out there, and it's tough competition. Speaking of, and moving on to number 4, Albion Online. Don't let this game's graphics put you off. This is genuinely one of the most unique MMOs currently on the market. Albion is a true PvP-focused sandbox. Now, if PvP is not your favorite content, there's still plenty to do in Albion. There's a massive crafting and gathering system, a housing system featuring farming, and you can even own your own store in town. But I'm not gonna lie, PvP is definitely the main focus and highlight of the game. Albion features a subscription-based monetization strategy that can also be purchased with in-game currency. However, with Albion, their subscription, known as Premium, doesn't actually lock you out from any of the content in the game. It just allows you to progress faster, and you get a little bit more money and experience than someone who doesn't have Premium. Albion is a classless MMO where you progress by leveling up and progressing the items which you actually wear and use. The combat is simple to understand, but very difficult to master. And there's tons of different forms of PvP, from no loot to full loot, 1v1, 3v3, 5v5, and of course, open world massive zergs between rival guilds. You could focus completely on PvP or focus on just gathering and skilling and crafting. Albion's economy is absolutely booming, and if you're the type of player who likes to play with friends, Albion might be one of the best group experiences in terms of free-to-play MMOs. Especially if you guys don't take yourselves too seriously and you don't mind losing some items along the way. This is a game where you can truly just do whatever you please whenever you like. It offers a massive amount of player choice, featuring almost no quests and no real objectives. Just get out there and forge your own path. And finally, we're in the top 3. In third place, we have none other than Final Fantasy XIV. Square Enix's contribution to the MMO genre after decades of providing some of the most influential games to the turn-based, story-driven single-player market, widely considered to be one of the best MMOs on the market currently, FF14 features an exceptionally immersive storyline, a true social gameplay experience, challenging and rewarding endgame group content, as well as a progression system that basically allows you to complete and level up every single class or job on one single character. Originally, this game was released to an extremely rocky start, which prompted the lead developer to basically start fresh and create a Realm Reborn. This basically was a reimagining of the game in many different ways. These days, there are 5 major expansions, including the most recent, Heavensward, which actually has been received a little bit more negatively than the 4 prior. I personally have only played through the first expansion, so it's tough for me to comment on that. However, Final Fantasy gives you an insane amount of content completely for free. They allow you to play through all of the expansions except the most recent one on what is known as a trial account. There are a few more restrictions, such as a level and a currency cap and restricted social interactions, but it's pretty impressive just how much content you can participate in without paying a single penny. You'd basically have to be living under a rock if you haven't heard about Final Fantasy XIV at this point. I mean, there's even a meme all about hearing about this game. With that being said, this is another narrative masterclass, and it's basically the only MMO that's truly in competition with World of Warcraft in regard to its endgame group content. And now, we're honing in on the last two games. These are, in my opinion, the single best free-to-play MMOs on the market, and it's a complete toss-up for me which one I actually prefer more, as I've played both of them extensively. Though I must admit, for different reasons. However, if we're going simply on playtime alone, I'll have to give the number 2 spot to GuildWars 2. Released in 2012, GuildWars 2 is a hybrid action combat mixed with tab target MMO that, in my opinion, still holds the spot as the single best horizontal progression focused MMO. The base game, which you can access completely for free, is filled to the brim with hundreds upon hundreds of hours of completionist content. And due to the way the game is designed, it's not like these are empty zones. The entire game's identity is built around the fact that they hate content becoming irrelevant or obsolete in any way, shape, or form. So ArenaNet does whatever they can to keep any and all content active since the game's release 13 years ago. There's also 5 major expansions along with plenty of smaller updates which make up the paid content. However, these are not necessary additions to the game in order to enjoy GuildWars 2. The most recent expansion in 2024, the Janthier Wilds, introduced player-owned housing, which has been a long-requested feature. And on top of that, GuildWars respects your time. No, seriously. With account-wide progression, birthday presents that offer you a brand new max-level character, and gear that maintains its power and relevance even a decade after its release, it's the perfect MMO to pick up or put down without ever feeling like you're missing out. In terms of some grievances, the graphics are definitely starting to feel a little dated, and inventory management can be quite a hassle. Also, if you're looking for a game with an active as well as complex and robust endgame rating system, GuildWars 2 doesn't really fit that role. But even though GuildWars 2 plays wildly different from GuildWars 1, and even with a future confirmed GuildWars 3 on the horizon, I still think GuildWars 2 is easily one of the best free-to-play MMOs out there. And it definitely deserves its spot as number 2. And finally, we made it, the number 1 spot. Any guesses? It's probably almost comically obvious at this point. Oldschool Runescape. Now, previously, this would not have been my top choice out of all the free-to-play MMOs to exist, mainly due to its outdated graphics and the overly simplistic style of the game. However, I can no longer deny that this is simply the best free-to-play MMO on the market. Originally released in 2004 as RuneScape 2, but re-released in 2013 as Oldschool Runescape, this click-to-move, click-to-attack, click-to-do-anything game might seem oversimple and childish, but just beneath the surface offers one of the most in-depth and addicting experiences available. Now, one thing to be aware of is that while this game is patently free-to-play, the free-to-play content is a mere fraction of the content total available. There's hundreds of hours of things for you to work towards even as a free player, but you'll be missing out on the majority of the game unless you purchase the subscription known as membership. Luckily, this can be purchased with both real-life money or in-game gold, so while it's expensive, it is possible to actually acquire this membership through just playing the game. On top of just the game itself, we've recently seen massive surges in popularity due to temporary game modes like Leagues, where players log into temporary worlds with increased experience rates and where the rules of the world operate slightly differently. Or more recently, we saw a ton of World of Warcraft players try Oldschool Runescape for the first time. And they brought a ton of new players as well. They were all seemingly fascinated with this simple click-to-move MMO. In my personal opinion, what Oldschool Runescape does best that no other game seems to capture is a never-ending sense of progression that is paced almost perfectly, almost to a T. Nothing comes across as too easy, yet most things, except for certain endgame content, doesn't come across as overly complex either. They've struck a perfect balance of grindy yet fun, while still maintaining that sense of accomplishment when you finally complete or reach your goals. Just talking about this game has me itching to hop back on. Anyway guys, I hope this list can help some of you decide what free-to-play MMOs to try out in 2025. I understand these lists don't change too often, we see so many of the same titles time and time again, but I wanted to rank these in my personal order, and then check back again in 2026 to see how the free-to-play MMO landscape has changed. Anyway, if none of these titles sounded very interesting to you guys, I do have a couple of runner-ups. First off, there's RuneScape 3, the more modern version of RuneScape that the old school version broke away from, maintaining a ton of the core ideas and premises, but also having increased pay-to-win and an action bar ability-based combat system. There's also Rift. I played Rift for the first time earlier this year, and while the game is definitely in maintenance mode and it's most definitely pay-to-win, I called it, and I quote, the best worst MMO ever, because I just had so much fun. There's PAL Vista, which is a skateboarding-themed version of RuneScape that's being made by an extremely small development team, which I recently checked out. It's very simple, very straightforward, but it utilizes a RuneScape-like skilling system, and it's genuinely a ton of fun. Then there's Neverwinter, which was actually on this list last year, but I replaced it with DDO, due to DDO maintaining a bit more faithfulness to Dungeons & Dragons. Also, Neverwinter really suffers from a lack of player base and pay-to-win systems. And on top of that, there's EverQuest, both versions, Star Trek Online, Wizard 101, Phantasy Star Online, and much, much more. But anyway, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who made it to the end of the video. Don't forget a like, a comment, a sub. Those things help a bunch. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider becoming a channel member. But I'll catch you all in the next one. Later.